Go back to England!
Boston, Massachusetts. It was a very difficult city to live in the 1760s. It was one of the first colonies to openly show its dislike for British rule. In 1768, British troops were sent to Boston to enforce the Townshend Acts. Imagine having a British soldier for every American. This really wasn't a good thing as far as the colonists were concerned. This alone made the British more unpopular to the colonists living in Boston. It is said the Boston Massacre started when a group of men were taunting a sentry guard outside the custom house in Boston. British Captain Thomas Preston, the commanding officer of the custom house, ordered his men to fix their bayonets and join the guard outside the building. The colonists responded by throwing snowballs and oyster shells at the guards, and Private Hugh Montgomery was hit, leading him to discharge his rifle and fire into the crowd. The other soldiers began firing a moment later, and when the smoke cleared, 5 colonists were dead or dying. Crispus Attucks, Patrick Carr, Samuel Bray, Samuel Maverick, and James Cladwell, and 3 more were injured. Although it is unclear whether Crispus Attucks, an African-American/Native American by birth, was the first to fall as a result of the massacre, but it is commonly believed that these 5 men are the first fatalities of the American Revolutionary War. It is interesting that the Boston Massacre is called a massacre at all. The Boston Massacre was a fight that both sides took part in. It was not a massacre, but people felt that the term would ignite the emotions of the colonists that would compel them to join the Patriots. Now, what really happened that resulted in the Boston Massacre, no historian really agrees upon. There are different depictions and narrations and witnesses that it has become impossible for anyone to know exactly what happened on March 5th, 1770. Sure, the colonists have had their part in wrongdoing, but however you look at it, the British acted quite harshly. Captain Preston and the 8 other soldiers were arrested the following morning. Despite the tragedy, they insisted that what transpired was not a willful act of murder. They had been outnumbered, threatened, and assaulted for hours, but public opinion didn't care. In the weeks following the massacre, British loyalty and Boston radicals fought a propaganda war. Future patriot Paul Revere published an engraving showing the soldiers firing a coordinated volley into an unarmed, peaceful crowd. That's fake news, people. Both sides told vastly different stories of what took place. Loyalists insisted the citizens were to blame for refusing to follow British laws, and radicals insisted the massacre was an intentional, unprovoked attack designed to quell the spirit of liberty. The governor of Massachusetts postponed the trial until they decided how would the soldiers be represented, what would justice look like for them, and who would take their case. The soldiers found their salvation in John Adams. Although an outspoken opponent of the Stamp Act, Adams was also dedicated to impartial enforcement of the law and the presumption of innocence for the accused. Adams seemed perfect. His public opposition to taxes meant no one would accuse him of being a loyalist, but his dedication to legal impartiality meant he might be willing to take this case, though it wasn't a great deal for him. Taking the case would not only make him unpopular, it would also risk his legal practice. But Adams believed every person deserved a defense, so he agreed to head the defense team. The day of the trial, Preston and his soldiers stand in a courtroom packed floor to ceiling. Adams encourages the jury to look beyond their prejudice and recognize that these men, outnumbered by an angry mob, had a right to self-defense. The first witness takes the stand, and Adams gets him to admit that he carried a sword that night, planning to attack the soldiers. Other witnesses testify about the violent provocations the soldiers endured. 2 more witnesses say that the order to fire did not come from Preston. Testimony is over. Time for closing remarks. Adams shuffles his papers and addresses the jury. I will enlarge no more evidence, but submit to you, gentlemen, that facts are a stubborn thing. Whatever your wishes may be, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. Nor is the law less stable than facts. If an assault was made on their lives, the law is clear. They had a right to kill in their own defense. Adams had made a persuasive case, but was it enough to overcome the anger, however justified, of his fellow colonists? The jury debated for 2.5 hours. At stake is not only the soldiers' lives, but Adams' reputation. Finally, they delivered their verdict. Not guilty. Captain Preston and 6 of his soldiers were to be acquitted. 2 were convicted of manslaughter, not murder, and they were branded on the thumb with an M. If they broke the law again, the mark would ensure a harsher sentence. The revolution is still years away, but the Boston Massacre had helped turn the colonial sentiment against King George III, the government's tax policy, and the British Army. Adams' involvement in the case gave him a reputation of impartiality amongst all 13 of the British colonies. After all, if even a fair-minded man like Adams believed in revolution, surely it wasn't so radical. Adams went on to be a delegate of the Colonial Congress and helped draft the Declaration of Independence. During the war, he served as a diplomat, helping gain naval support from France in negotiating the eventual peace treaty with Britain. In 1780, while minister to Great Britain, he noticed a familiar face on the streets of London, Captain Thomas Preston. These 2 men passing on the streets had helped ignite a revolution. The Boston Massacre is one of the many reasons why the 13 colonies of Britain united against the British monarchy, and a war for freedom ensued.
Good God, consider yourselves fortunate that you have John Adams to abuse, for no sane man would tolerate it.
John Gilmore, we've heard this before. Now for God's sake, John, now.
I say vote yes.
No.
Vote yes.
No.
Vote for independence.
Open up a window.
I say vote yes.
Down, John.
Vote for independence. Will someone shut that mouth?